Million-Word Reading Project. Collection 1. Book 1. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Produced by Million-Word Reading Project Workshop. Chapter 1. Down a Rabbit Hole. Alice had sat on the bank by her sister till she was tired. Once or twice she had looked at the book her sister held in her hand, but there were no pictures in it. And what is the use of a book, thought Alice, without pictures? The hot day made her quite sleepy. She wondered if she should get up and pick some flowers to make a flower chain. Just then a white rabbit with pink eyes ran close by her. That was nothing unusual. And Alice did not think it so strange to hear the rabbit say, "Oh dear, I shall be late." But when the rabbit took a watch out of its pocket and looked at it and then ran on, Alice jumped up, for she knew it was the first time she had seen a rabbit with a watch. She ran to get a look at it and was just in time to see it jump down a large rabbit hole near the fence. As fast as she could go, Alice went down the hole after it. She did not once stop to think how in the world she was to get out. The hole went straight on for some way and then turned down with a sharp bend. It was so sharp that Alice had no time to think to stop till she found herself falling down a deep well. Either the well was very deep, or she fell very slowly, for it took her a long time to go down. And as she went she had time to look at the strange things she passed. First she tried to look down and make out what was there, but it was too dark to see anything. Then she looked at the sides of the well and saw that they were filled with bookshelves. Here and there she saw maps hung on hooks. She took down a jar from one of the shelves as she passed. On it was the word jam, but there was no jam in it, so she put it back on one of the shelves as she fell past it. Well, thought Alice to herself, after such a fall as this, I shall not mind falling downstairs at all. How brave they'll all think me at home. Why, I wouldn't say anything if I fell off the top of the house. Down, down, down. Would the fall never come to an end? I should like to know, she said, how far I have come by this time. Wouldn't it be strange if I should fall right through the earth and come out where the folks walk with their feet up and their heads down? Down, down, down. There was nothing else to do, so Alice soon began talking again. Dinah will miss me tonight, I think. Dinah was the cat. I hope they'll remember to give her some milk at tea time. Dinah, my dear, I wish you were down here with me. There are no mice in the air, but you might catch a bat. That's much like a mouse, you know. But do cats eat bats? And here Alice must have gone to sleep, for she dreamed that she walked hand in hand with Dinah. Just as she asked her, "Now, Dinah, tell me the truth, do you eat bats?" All at once, down she came on a pile of sticks and dry leaves, and the long fall was over. Alice was not a bit hurt, but at once jumped to her feet. She looked up, but all was dark there. At the end of a long hall in front of her the white rabbit was still in sight. There was no time to be lost, so off Alice went like the wind, and was just in time to hear it say, "Oh, my ears, how late it is." Then it was out of sight. She found she was in a long hall with a low roof. The hall was lit up by a row of lighted lamps hanging from the roof. There were doors on all sides, but when Alice had tried them, she found they were all locked. She walked back and forth and tried to think how she was to get out. At last she came to a stand made all of glass. On it was a tiny key of gold, and Alice thought that this might be a key to one of the doors of the hall. But when she had tried the key in each lock, she found the locks were too large, or the key was too small. But when she went round the hall once more she came to a low curtain which she had not seen at first. When she drew the curtain back, she found a small door, not much more than a foot high. She tried the key in the lock, and to her great joy, it fitted. Alice found that the door led to a hall the size of a rat hole. She knelt down and looked through it into a garden of beautiful flowers. How she longed to get out of that dark hall and near those bright flowers, but she could not even get her head through the door. And if my head would go through, thought Alice, it would be of no use, for the rest of me would still be too large to go through. Oh, how I wish I could grow small. I think I could, if I knew how to start. There seemed to be no use to wait by the small door, so she went back to the stand. She hoped that she might find a key to one of the large doors, or maybe a book that would teach her to grow small. This time she found a small bottle on it. "I am sure it was not here just now," said Alice, and round the neck of the bottle was a tag with the words, "Drink me" printed on it. It was all right to say "drink me," but Alice would not do that in a hurry. "No, I'll look first," she said, "and see if it's marked poison or not." She had been taught, if you drink much from a bottle marked poison, it is sure to make you sick. This had no such mark on it, so she dared to taste it, and as she found it nice, she soon drank it off. "How strange I feel," said Alice. "I am sure I am not so large as I was." And so it was. She was now not quite a foot high, and her face lighted up at the thought that she was now the right size to go through the small door and get out to that lovely garden. Poor Alice! When she reached the door she found that she had left the key on the stand, but when she went back for it, she found she could not reach it again. She could see it through the glass, and she tried her best to climb one of the legs of the stand, but it was too smooth. And when she was quite tired out, she sat down and cried. "Come. It's no use crying like that," Alice said to herself as sharply as she could speak. "I advise you to stop at once." Soon her eyes fell on a small glass box that lay on the floor. She looked in it and found a tiny cake on which were the words "Eat me." "Well, I'll eat it," said Alice, "and if it makes me grow tall, I can reach the key, and if it makes me grow smaller, I can creep under the door. So either way I'll get into the garden, and I don't care which happens." So she set to work and soon ate all the cake. Chapter 2. The Pool of Tears. "How strange! Oh dear," said Alice, "how tall I am, and all at once too. Goodbye, feet." When she looked down at her feet they seemed so far off, she thought they would soon be out of sight. "Oh, my poor feet, who will put on your shoes for you now, dears? I'm sure I shan't do it. I shall be a great deal too far off to take care of you. You must take care of yourselves, but I must be kind to them," thought Alice, "or they won't walk the way I want to go. Let me see, I'll give them a pair of new shoes every Christmas." She stopped to think how she would send them. They must go by the mail, she thought, and how funny it'll seem to send shoes to one's own feet. How strange the address will look. Oh dear, what nonsense I'm talking. Just then her head struck the roof of the hall. In fact, she was now more than 9 feet high, and she at once took up the small key and went back to the door. Poor Alice! She could only lie down on one side to look through to the garden with one eye. It was more hopeless than ever to get through, so she sat down and had a good cry. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," said Alice. "A great big girl like you," she might well say this, "to cry in this way. Stop at once, I tell you." But she went on all the same, and shed tears till there was a large pool all round her, about 4 inches deep and reaching half down the hall. At last she heard the sound of feet not far off. Then she dried her eyes in a great hurry to see who it was. It was the White Rabbit that had come back, dressed in fine clothes, with a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. He ran on in a great hurry and talked to himself as he came. "Oh, the Duchess, the Duchess. Oh, won't she be angry if I've made her wait?" Alice felt so bad and so in need of help from someone that when the rabbit came near, she said in a low voice, "If you please, sir." The rabbit was greatly surprised. He dropped the white kid gloves and the fan and ran off into the dark as fast as his feet could take him. Alice took up the fan and gloves, and as the hall was quite hot, she fanned herself all the time she went on talking. "Dear, dear, how strange all things are today. Could I have been changed in the night? Let me think, was I the same when I got up today? It seems to me I didn't feel quite the same. But if I'm not the same, then who in the world am I?" Then she thought of all the girls she knew that were of her age, to see if she could have been changed for one of them. "I'm sure I'm not Ada," she said, "for her hair is in such long curls, and mine doesn't curl at all. And I'm sure I can't be Mabel, for I know all sorts of things, and she, oh, she knows so little. Then, she's she, And and oh dear. How strange it all is. I'll try if I know all the things I used to know. Let me see, 4 times 5 is 12, and 4 times 6 is 13, and 4 times 7 is, oh dear, that is not right. I must have been changed for Mabel. I'll try if I know how does the little, and she placed her hands on her lap, as if she were at school and tried to say it, but her voice sounded strange, and the words did not come the same as they used to do. I'm sure those are not the right words, said poor Alice. And her eyes filled with tears as she went on, I must be Mabel after all, and I shall have to go and live in that small house, and have almost no toys to play with, and oh, such hard things to learn. No, I've made up my mind. If I'm Mabel, I'll stay down here. It'll be no use for them to put their heads down and say, come up, dear. I shall look up and say, who am I, then? Tell me that first, and then if I like it, I'll come up. If not, I'll stay down here till I'm someone else, but, oh dear. Alice cried again, I do wish they would put their heads down. I am so tired of this place. As she said this, she looked down at her hands and saw that she had put on one of the rabbit's white kid gloves while she was talking. How can I have done that, she thought. I must have grown small once more. She got up and went to the glass stand to test her height by that, and found that she was now not more than 2 feet high, and still growing smaller quite fast. She soon found out that the cause of this was the fan she held. She dropped it at once, or she might have grown as small as a fly. At first Alice was sad about the quick change, but glad that it was no worse. Now for the garden, and she ran with all her speed back to the small door. But, oh dear, the door was shut, and the key lay on the glass stand. And things are worse than ever, thought the poor child, for I never was so small as this, never. It's too bad that it is. As she said these words her foot slipped, and in another moment, she was up to her chin in salt water. At first she thought she must be in the sea, but she soon made out that she was in the pool of tears which she had wept when she was 9 feet high. I wish I hadn't cried so much, said Alice as she swam round and tried to find her way out. I shall now be drowned in my own tears. That will be a strange thing, to be sure. But all things are strange today. Just then she heard a noise in the pool a little way off, and she swam near to make out what it was. At first she thought it must be a whale, but when she thought how small she was now, she soon made out that it was a mouse that had slipped in the pond. Would it be of any use now to speak to this mouse? All things are so strange down here. I should think maybe it can talk, at least there's no harm to try. So she said, Oh, mouse, do you know the way out of this pool? I have swum here till I'm quite tired. The mouse looked at her with its small eyes, but it did not speak. It may be a French mouse, thought Alice. So she asked in French where her cat was. That was all the French she could think of just then. The mouse quickly jumped out of the water and seemed in a great fright. Oh, I beg your pardon, cried Alice. I quite forgot you didn't like cats. Not like cats? Cried the mouse in a sharp voice. Would you like cats if you were me? Well, I guess not, said Alice, but please don't get angry. And yet I wish I could show you our cat, Dinah. I'm sure you'd like cats if you could see her. She is such a dear thing. Alice went on, half to herself, as she swam round in the pool, and she sits by the fire, and licks her paws and washes her face, and she is such a nice soft thing, and she's a fine one to catch mice, oh, dear. Alice cried, for this time the mouse was frightened, and each hair stood on end. We won't talk of her if you don't like it. We talk, cried the mouse, who was trembling. As if I would talk on this subject. All rats hate them. Don't let me hear the name again. I won't, said Alice, in a great hurry to change the subject. Are you fond of dogs? The mouse did not speak, so Alice went on, there is such a nice dog near our house, I should like to show you. A tiny bright-eyed dog, you know, with such long curly brown hair. And it'll fetch things when you throw them, and it'll sit up and beg for its meat, and do all sorts of things. I can't tell you half of them. And it kills all the rats, and, oh dear. Alice cried in a sad voice. "I've made it angry again." For the mouse swam off from her as fast as it could go and made quite a noise in the pool as it went. So she called it in a soft, kind voice, "Mouse dear, do come back and we won't talk of cats or dogs if you don't like them." When the mouse heard this, it turned round and swam back to her. Its face was quite pale with anger, Alice thought, and it said in a low, weak voice, "Let us get to the shore, and then I'll tell you why I hate cats and dogs." It was high time to go, for the pool was by this time quite crowded with the birds and beasts that had slipped into it. Alice led the way and they all swam to the shore. Chapter 3. A Race. They were a strange-looking crowd as they stood or sat on the bank. The wings and tails of the birds dropped to the earth. The fur of the beasts stuck close to them. They were all wet and uncomfortable. The first question was, of course, how to get dry. They had a long discussion about this, and Alice joined them, as if she had known them all her life. But it was hard to tell what was best. "What I want to say," said the dodo at last, "is that the best way to get us dry would be a race." "What kind of race?" asked Alice, not that she wanted very much to know, but the dodo had paused as if it thought that someone ought to speak, and no one else would say a word. "Why," said the dodo, "the best way to explain it is to do it." First it drew a race course, and then all the party were placed on the course, here and there. There was no 1, 2, 3, and here we go, but they ran when they liked and stopped when they liked, so that no one could tell when the race was over. When they had been running half an hour or so, and were all quite dry, the dodo called out, "The race is over," and they all crowded round it and asked, "But who has won?" The dodo could not tell this at first, but it sat for a long time with one claw pressed to its head, while the rest waited, but did not speak. At last the dodo said, "All have won, and each must have a prize." "But who is to give them?" all asked at once. "Why, she of course," said the dodo, as it pointed to Alice with one long claw. And at once, the whole party crowded round her as they called out, "A prize, a prize." Alice did not know what to do, but she pulled from her pocket a box of little cakes. Luckily, they did not get wet while she was in the pool, and handed them round as prizes. There was exactly one for each all round. "But she must have a prize, you know," said the mouse. "Of course," the dodo said. "What else have you got?" It went on as it turned to Alice. "A thimble," said Alice, looking quite sad. "Hand it here," said the dodo. Then they all crowded round her once more. The dodo handed the thimble back to Alice and said, "We beg that you accept this fine thimble." When it had made this short speech, they all cheered. Alice thought the whole thing quite foolish, but they all looked so serious that she did not dare to laugh. As she could not think what to say, she bowed and took the thimble, while she looked as serious as she could. The next thing was to eat the cakes. This caused some noise, as the large birds said they could not taste theirs, and the small ones choked and had to be patted on the back. It was over at last, and they sat down in a ring and begged the mouse to tell them a tale. "You said you would tell us why you hate cats and dogs," said Alice. "Mine is a long and a sad tale," said the mouse, as it turned to Alice with a sigh. "It is a long tale, I'm sure," said Alice, looking down at the mouse's tail, "but why do you call it sad?" "I shall not tell you," said the mouse, as it got up and walked off. "Please come back and tell us your tale," called Alice, and all joined in, "Yes, please do." But the mouse shook its head and walked on, and was soon out of sight. "I wish I had our Dinah here, I know I do," said Alice. "She'd soon fetch it back." "And who is Dinah, if I may dare to ask such a thing?" said one of the birds. Alice was glad to talk of her pet. "Dinah's our cat, and she's such a fine one to catch mice. And oh, I wish you could see her run after a bird. Why, she'll eat a bird as soon as she looks at it." This speech surprised the party. Some of the birds rushed off at once. One old bird wrapped itself up carefully and said, "I must get home. The night air doesn't suit my throat." Another bird called out in a trembling voice to her children, "Come, my dears. It's high time you were all in bed." Soon they all moved off and Alice was left alone. "I wish I hadn't told them of Dinah," she said to herself. No one seems to like her down here, and I'm sure she's the best cat in the world. Oh, my dear Dinah. Shall I ever see you anymore?" And here poor Alice burst into tears, for she felt very sad and lonely. In a short time she heard footsteps in the distance, and she looked up with the hope that the mouse had changed its mind and come back to finish its story. Chapter 4. The Rabbit Sends in a Little Bill. It was the White Rabbit who walked back again. It looked from side to side as it went, as if it had lost something, and Alice heard it say to itself, "The Duchess. The Duchess. Oh, my dear. She'll surely get my head cut off. Where can I have lost them?" Alice guessed at once that he was in search of the fan and a pair of white kid gloves, and she set out to hunt for them, but they were not to be found. All things seemed to have changed since her swim in the pool. The great hall with the glass stand and the little door, all were gone. Soon the rabbit saw Alice and called out to her, "Why, Anne, what are you out here for? Run home at once and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan. Quick, now." And Alice was so frightened that she ran off and did not wait to tell it who she was. "He took me for his housemaid," she said to herself as she ran. "What will he think when he finds out who I am? But I must take him his fan and gloves, if I can find them." As she said this she came to a small neat house. On the door of the house was a bright brass plate with the name W. Rabbit on it. She ran upstairs quickly for fear that she should meet Anne and be turned out of the house before she had found the fan and gloves. "How strange it seems that I should do things for a rabbit. I guess Dinah will send me to wait on her next." By this time she had made her way to a tidy room with a table near the wall, and on it, as she had hoped, she found a fan and 2 or 3 pairs of small white kid gloves. She took up the fan and a pair of gloves and turned to leave the room. Just then, her eye fell upon a small bottle that stood near. There was no tag this time with the words "Drink me," but Alice put it to her lips. "I know I am sure to change in some way if I eat or drink anything, so I'll just see what this does. I do hope it'll make me grow large again, for I'm quite tired of this size," Alice said to herself. It did as she had wished. In a short time, her head pressed the roof so hard she couldn't stand up straight. She put the bottle down in a hurry and said, "That's as much as I need. I hope I shan't grow any more. I can't get out at the door. I do wish I hadn't drunk so much." But it was too late to wish that. She grew and grew, till she had to kneel down on the floor. Next there was not room for this, and she had to lie down. Still she grew and grew and grew till she had to put one arm out the window and one foot up the chimney. She said to herself, "Now I can do no more, whatever happens." It seemed impossible for her to get out of the room. "I wish I was at home," thought poor Alice, "where I wouldn't change so much, and where I didn't have to do things for mice and rabbits. I wish I hadn't gone down that rabbit hole, and yet, it's strange, you know, this sort of life. When I used to read fairy tales, I thought they were just made up by someone, and now here I am in one myself. When I grow up I'll write a book about these strange things, but I'm grown up now." Then she added in a sad voice, "At least there's no room to grow any more here." She heard a voice outside and stopped to listen. Anne, said the voice, "fetch me my gloves, quick." Then came the sound of feet on the stairs. Alice knew it was the rabbit, and that it had come to look for her. She trembled with fear till she shook the house. Poor thing! She didn't think that she was now about 1,000 times as large as the rabbit, and had no reason to be afraid of it. Soon the rabbit came to the door and tried to come in, but Alice's arm pressed it so hard that the door would not move. Alice heard it say, "Then I'll go round and get in at the window." "That you won't," thought Alice. Then she waited till she heard the rabbit quite near the window, then spread out her hand and tried to catch it. She did not get hold of it, but she heard a scream and a fall. Next came an angry voice, the rabbit's, "Pat, Pat, where are you?" And then a voice which was new to her, "I'm here. Digging for apples, Your Honor." "Digging for apples, indeed," said the rabbit. "Here. Come and help me out of this. Now, tell me, Pat, what's that in the window?" "Sure it's an arm, Your Honor." "An arm, you goose," Whoever saw one that size? Why, it fills the whole window." "Sure it does, Your Honor, but it's an arm for all that." "Well, go and take it out." For a long time they seemed to stand still, but now and then Alice could hear a few words in a low voice, such as, "Sure I don't like it, Your Honor, at all, at all." "Do as I tell you, you coward," and at last she spread out her hand and tried to catch hold of them. This time there were two little screams. "I should like to know what they will do next. I only wish they could pull me out. I'm sure I don't want to stay in here." She waited for some time, but all was still. At last came the noise of small cartwheels and the sound of voices. From the voices, she made out the words, "Where's the other ladder?" "Why, Bill's got the other." "Bill, fetch it here." "Here, put them up at this place." "No, tie them first, they don't reach half as high as they should yet." "Oh, they'll do." "Here, Bill, catch hold of this rope, will the roof bear?" "Mind that loose late." "Oh, here it comes." "Look out." A loud crash. "Now who did that?" "It was Bill, I guess." "Who's to go down the chimney?" "No, I shan't." "You do it." "That I won't then." "Bill's got to go down." "Here, Bill, you got to go down the chimney." "Oh, so Bill's got to come down, has he?" said Alice to herself. "Why, they seem to put all the work on Bill. I wouldn't be in Bill's place for a good deal. This fireplace is small, to be sure, but I think I can kick some." She drew her foot as far down as she could and waited till she heard a small beast, she couldn't guess of what sort it was, come down the chimney quite close to her. Then she said to herself, "This is Bill," gave one sharp kick and waited to see what would happen next. The first thing she heard was, "There goes Bill," then the rabbit's voice, "Catch him, you by the fence." Then all was still, then the voices, "Hold up his head, Brandy now, don't choke him, how was it, old fellow? What sent you up so fast? Tell us all about it." Last came a weak voice, "That's Bill," thought Alice. "Well, I don't know, no more, thank you, I'm not so weak now, but I'm too shocked to tell you. All I know is, a thing comes at me suddenly, and up I go like a rocket." "So you did, old fellow," said the others. "We must burn the house down," said the rabbit's voice, and Alice called out as loud as she could, "If you do, I'll set Dinah at you." At once all was still as death, and Alice thought, what will they do next? If they were wise, they'd take the roof off. Then she heard the rabbit say, "1 load will do to start with." "A load of what?" thought Alice, but she had not long to doubt, for soon a shower of small stones came in at the window, and some of them hit her in the face. "I'll put a stop to this," she said to herself, and shouted out, "You stop that, at once." Again all was still as death. Alice saw that the stones all changed to small cakes as they lay on the floor, and a bright thought came to her. "If I eat one of these cakes," she said, "it is sure to make some change in my size. And as it can't make me larger, I hope it will change me to the size I used to be." So she ate one of the cakes, and was glad to see that she grew smaller quite fast. She was soon so small that she could get through the door, so she ran out of the house and found quite a crowd of beasts and birds in the yard. The poor lizard, Bill, was in the middle of the group, held up by 2 guinea pigs, who gave it something to drink out of a bottle. They all ran after Alice as soon as she came out, but she ran off as hard as she could and was soon safe in a thick wood. "The first thing I've got to do," said Alice to herself, as she walked round in the wood, "is to grow to my right size again. And the next thing is to find my way to that lovely garden. I think that will be the best plan." It was an excellent plan, no doubt, and very well arranged, but the hard thing was that she had not the smallest idea how she should start to work it out. And while she was looking anxiously about through the trees, a sharp bark just over her head made her look up in a great hurry. A great puppy was looking down at her with large round eyes, putting out one paw and trying to touch her. "Poor thing," said Alice in a kind voice, and tried hard to show it that she wished to be its friend, but she was terribly frightened all the time when she thought that it might be hungry. Then, perhaps, it would eat her up. Alice could not think what to do next, so she picked up a bit of stick and held it out to the puppy. It jumped from the tree with a cry of joy, as if to play with it. Then Alice moved away around a large plant that stood near, but the puppy soon found her and made a rush at the stick again, trying to get hold of it. Alice felt that it was quite like a game with a horse and expected to be crushed under its great feet. At last, to her joy, it seemed to grow tired of the sport. It ran a long way off and sat down with its tongue out of its mouth and its big eyes half shut. This seemed to Alice a good time to get out of its sight, so she set out at once and ran till she was quite tired and out of breath, until the puppy's bark sounded quite faint. "And yet what a dear puppy it was," said Alice, as she stopped to rest and fanned herself with a leaf. "I should have liked so much to teach it tricks, if I'd been the right size to do it. Oh dear. I've got to grow up again. Let me see, how am I to do it? I guess I ought to eat or drink something, but I don't know what." Alice looked all round her at the grass, the flowers, the leaves, but could not see a thing that looked like the right thing to eat or drink to make her grow. There was a large mushroom near her, about the same height as she was, and when she had looked all round it, she thought she might as well look and see what was on the top of it. She stretched up as tall as she could, and her eyes met those of a large blue caterpillar that sat on the top with its arms folded, smoking a strange pipe, and taking no notice of her, or of anything else. Chapter 5. Advice from a Caterpillar. The caterpillar looked at Alice, and she stared at it, but did not speak. At last, it took the pipe from its mouth and said, "Who are you?" Alice said, "I'm not sure, sir, who I am just now. I know who I was when I left home, but I think I have been changed 2 or 3 times since then." "What do you mean by that?" asked the caterpillar. "I'm afraid I can't tell you, for I'm sure I don't know myself, but it makes one's head swim to change so many times all in one day." "It doesn't," said the caterpillar. "Well, maybe you haven't found it so yet," said Alice, "but when you have to change, you will, someday, you know. I should think you'd feel it strange, won't you?" "Not a bit," said the caterpillar. "Well, you may not feel as I do," said Alice. "All I know is, it feels strange to me to change so much." "You?" said the caterpillar with its nose in the air. "Who are you?" This question brought them back to the point from which they started. Alice was not pleased at this, so she said seriously, "I think you ought to tell me who you are first." "Why?" said the caterpillar. As Alice could not think what to say to this, and as the caterpillar did not seem interested in talking, she turned away. "Come back," said the caterpillar. "I have something to say to you." Alice turned and came back. "Keep your temper," said the caterpillar. "Is that all?" asked Alice, while she hid her anger as well as she could. "No," said the caterpillar. Alice waited what seemed to her a long time, while it sat and smoked, but did not speak. At last, it took the pipe from its mouth and said, "So you think you're changed, do you?" "I'm afraid I am, sir," said Alice. "I don't know things as I once did, and I don't keep the same size, but a short while at a time." "What things is it you don't know?" "Well, I've tried to say the things I knew at school, but the words all came wrong." "Let me hear you say, 'You are old, Father William,'" said the caterpillar. Alice folded her hands and began, "You are old, Father William," the young man said, "and your hair has become very white, and yet you stand all the time on your head. Do you think, at your age, it is right?" "In my youth," Father William then said to his son, "I feared it might injure the brain. But now that I'm perfectly sure I have none, why, I do it again and again." "That is not said right," said the caterpillar. "Not quite right, I'm afraid," said Alice. "Some of the words are changed." "It is wrong from beginning to end," said the caterpillar, and there was silence for some minutes. The caterpillar was the first to speak. "What size do you want to be?" "Oh, I don't care so much about size, but one doesn't like to change so much, you know." "I don't know," it said. Alice was too much upset to speak, for she had never, in all her life, been talked to in that rude way. "Do you like your size now?" asked the caterpillar. "Well, I'm not quite so large as I would like to be," said Alice. 3 inches is too short." "It is a good height, indeed," said the caterpillar, and it raised itself up straight as it spoke. It was just 3 inches high. "But I'm not used to it," said poor Alice. And she thought, "I wish the things wouldn't be so easy to get mad." "You'll get used to it in time," the caterpillar said, as it put the pipe to its mouth, and Alice waited till it should choose to speak. At last it took the pipe from its mouth, yawned once or twice, and shook itself. Then it got down from the mushroom and crawled off in the grass. As it went it said, "One side will make you tall, and one side will make you small." "One side of what?" thought Alice to herself. "Of the mushroom," said the caterpillar, just as if it had heard her speak, and in another moment it was out of sight. Alice stood and looked at the mushroom a long time and tried to make out which were the 2 sides of it. As it was round, she found this a hard thing to do. At last she stretched her arms round it as far as they would go and broke off a bit of the edge with each hand. "And now which is which?" she said to herself, and ate a small piece of the bit from the right hand to try what it would do. The next moment she felt her chin strike her foot with a hard blow. She was very frightened at this quick change, but she felt that there was no time to be lost as she was growing small so fast, so she set to work at once to eat some from the left hand. "Come, my head's free at last," said Alice, with great joy. But her joy changed to fear when she found that her waist and hands were nowhere to be seen. All she could see when she looked down was a great length of neck, which seemed to rise like a stalk out of a sea of green leaves that lay far below her. "What can all that green thing be?" said Alice. "And where has my shoulder got to? And oh, my poor hands, how is it I can't see you?" She moved them as she spoke. The green leaves shook, as if to let her know her hands were there, but she could not see them. As there seemed to be no chance to get her hands up to her head, she tried to get her head down to them, and was pleased to find that her neck would bend about like a snake. She found the sea of green was the tops of the trees under which she had been walking. Just as she had bent her neck down and decided to dive in the sea of green, a sharp noise made her draw back in a hurry. A large bird had flown into her face and struck her with its wings. "Snake! Snake!" screamed the bird. "I'm not a snake," said Alice. "Let me alone." "Snake, I say, snake!" cried the bird. Then it added with a kind of sob, "I've tried every way, and nothing seems to suit them." "I don't know what you mean," said Alice. The bird seemed not to hear her, but went on, "I've tried the roots of trees, and I've tried banks, and I've tried a fence, but those snakes, there's no way to please them. As if it were not trouble enough to hatch the eggs, but I must watch for snakes night and day. Why, I haven't had any sleep these 3 weeks." "I'm very sorry you've been annoyed," said Alice, who began to see what it meant. "And just as I had built my nest in this high tree," the bird went on, raising its voice to a scream, "and just as I thought I should be free of them at last, they fell down from the sky. Oh, snake! But I'm not a snake, I tell you," said Alice. I'm a, well, what are you?" said the bird. "I can see you will not tell me the truth." I'm a little girl," said Alice, though she was not sure what she was when she thought of all the changes she had gone through that day. "I've seen girls in my time, but none with such a neck as that," said the bird. "No. You're a snake, and there's no use to say you're not. I guess you'll say next that you don't eat eggs." "Of course I eat eggs," said Alice, "but girls eat eggs quite as much as snakes do, you know." "I don't know," said the bird, "but if they do, why, then they're a kind of snake. That's all I can say." This was such a new thing to Alice that at first she did not speak. This gave the bird a chance to add, "You want eggs now. I know that quite well. But I don't want eggs, and if I did I shouldn't want yours. I don't like them raw." "Well, be off, then," said the bird as it sat down in its nest. Alice crouched down through the trees as well as she could, for her neck kept getting caught among the branches, and now and then she had to stop to get it off. At last, she thought of the mushroom in her hands and set to work with great care to take a small bite first from the right hand, then from the left, till at last she brought herself down to the right size. It felt quite strange at first, but she soon got used to it. "Come, "There's half my plan done now," she said. "How strange all these things are. I'm never sure what I'm going to be, from one minute to another. I'm glad I'm back to my right size. The next thing is to get into that garden. How is that to be done? I should like to know." As she said this, she saw in front of her a small house, not more than 4 feet high. "Who lives there?" thought Alice. "It'll not do at all to come upon them this size. Why, I should frighten them." So she ate some of the right-hand bit again, and did not dare to go near the house till she had brought herself down to 9 inches high. Chapter 6. Pig and Pepper. For a while Alice stood and looked at the house, and tried to think what to do next, when a footman ran out of the wood. From his clothes, she considered him to be a footman, though if she had judged by his face she would have called him a fish, and knocked at the door with his fist. A footman with a round face and large eyes came to the door. Alice wanted to know what it all meant, so she crept a short way out of the wood, to hear what they said. The fish footman took from under his arm a great letter, and handed it to the other, and said in a serious voice, "For the Duchess, from the Queen." The frog footman said in the same serious voice, "From the Queen, for the Duchess." Then they both bowed so low that their heads touched each other. All this made Alice laugh so much that she had to run back to the wood for fear they would hear her. When she next looked out, the fish footman was gone, and the other sat on the ground near the door, and stared up at the sky. Alice went up to the door and knocked. "There's no use for you to knock," said the footman. "I'm on the same side of the door that you are, and there is so much noise in the room that no one could hear you." There was, indeed, a great noise in the house, a crying and sneezing, and now and then a great crash, as if a dish or a pot had been broken to pieces. "Please, then," said Alice, "how am I to get in?" "There might be some sense in your knocking," the footman went on, "if we were not both on the same side of the door. If you were in the room, you might knock, and I could let you out, you know." He looked up at the sky all the time he was speaking, and Alice thought this was quite rude. But perhaps he can't help it, she thought. His eyes are so near the top of his head. Still he might answer questions. "How am I to get in?" she asked. "I shall sit here," the footman said, "till tomorrow." Just then, the door of the house flew open, and a large plate flew out straight at the footman's head. It just passed his nose, and broke to pieces against one of the trees behind him. "Or next day, maybe," he went on in the same voice, as if he had not seen the plate. "How am I to get in?" Alice asked as loud as she could speak. "Are you to get in at all?" he said. "That's the first thing, you know." It was, no doubt, but Alice didn't like to be told so. The footman seemed to think this a good time to say again, "I shall sit here for days and days." "But what am I to do?" said Alice. "Do what you like," he said. "Oh, it's no use to try to talk to him," said Alice. "He is a fool." And she opened the door and went in. The door led right into a large room that was full of smoke from one end to the other. The Duchess sat on a stool and held a child in her arms. The cook stood near the fire and stirred a large pot which seemed to be full of soup. "There's too much pepper in that soup," Alice said to herself. There was too much of it in the air, for the Duchess sneezed now and then, and a child sneezed and cried all the time. A large cat sat nearby grinning from ear to ear. "Please, would you tell me," said Alice, not quite sure that it was right for her to speak first, "why your cat grins like that?" "It's a Cheshire cat," said the Duchess, "and that's why." "Pig." She said the last word so loud that Alice jumped, but she soon saw that the Duchess spoke to the child and not to her. So she went on, "I didn't know that Cheshire cats grinned. In fact, I didn't know that cats could grin." "They all can," said the Duchess, "and most of them do." "I don't know of any that do," Alice said, quite pleased to have someone to talk with. "You don't know much," said the Duchess, "and that's a fact." Alice did not at all like the way in which this was said, and thought it would be wise to speak of something else. While she tried to think of what to say, the cook took the pot from the fire and at once started throwing things at the Duchess and the child. The fire irons came first, then pots, pans, plates and cups flew through the air. The Duchess did not seem to see them, even when they hit her, and the child had cried so loud all the while that one could not tell if the blows hurt it or not. "Oh, please mind what you do," cried Alice, as she jumped up and down in great fear. "Hold your tongue," said the Duchess. Then she began a sort of song to the child, giving it a hard shake at the end of each line. At the end of the song she threw the child at Alice and said, "Here, you may nurse it a bit if you like. I must go and get ready to play croquet with the Queen." So she hurried out of the room. The cook threw a pan after her as she went, but it just missed her. Alice caught the child with some difficulty, as it was a strange little creature, and held out its arms and legs in all directions. Just like a starfish, Alice thought. As soon as she found out the right way to nurse it, which was to twist it up in a sort of knot, then keep tight hold of its right ear and left foot, she took it out in the fresh air. "If I don't take this child with me," thought Alice, "they're sure to kill it in a day or two. Wouldn't it be wrong to leave it here?" She said the last words out loud, and the child grunted. It had stopped sneezing by this time. "Don't grunt," said Alice. "That is not at all the right way to do." The child grunted again, and Alice looked at its face to see what was wrong with it. It had a strange nose and its eyes were quite small too. In fact, she did not like the look of the thing at all. Perhaps that was not a grunt, but a sob, and she looked to see if there were tears in its eyes. No, there were no tears. "If you're going to turn into a pig, my dear," said Alice, "I'll have no more to do with you." The poor thing sobbed once more, or grunted, Alice couldn't say which. "Now, what am I to do with this thing when I get it home?" thought Alice. Just then it grunted so loudly that she looked down at its face with fear. This time there could be no mistake about it, it was a pig. So she set the little creature down and felt glad to see it run quietly off into the wood. As she turned to walk on, she saw the Cheshire Cat on the branch of a tree a few yards off. The cat grinned when it saw Alice. It looked like a good cat, she thought. Still, it had long claws and large teeth, so she felt she ought to be kind to it. "Cat," said Alice, "would you please tell me which way I ought to walk from here?" "That depends on where you want to go to," said the cat. "I don't much care where," said Alice. "Then you need not care which way you walk," said the cat. "So long as I get somewhere," Alice added. "Oh, you're sure to do that, if you don't stop," said the cat. Alice knew that this was true, so she asked, "What sort of people live near here?" "In that way," said the cat, with a wave of its right paw, "lives a hatter, and in that way, with a wave of its left paw, lives a March hare. Go to see the one you like. They're both mad." "But I don't want to go where mad folks live," said Alice. "Oh, you can't help that," said the cat. "We're all mad here." "I'm mad." "You're mad." "How do you know I'm mad?" asked Alice. "You must be," said the cat, "or you wouldn't have come here." Alice didn't think that proved it at all, but she went on, "And how do you know that you are mad?" "First," said the cat, "a dog's not mad. Do you agree?" "Yes." "Well, then," the cat went on, "you know a dog growls when it's angry, and wags its tail when it's pleased. Now I growl when I'm pleased, and wag my tail when I'm angry. So you see, I'm mad." "I say the cat purrs." "I do not call it a growl," said Alice. "Call it what you like," said the cat. "Do you play croquet with the Queen today?" "I should like it, but I haven't been asked yet," said Alice. "You'll see me there," said the cat, and disappeared. Alice did not think this so strange, as she was now used to strange things. While she still looked at the place where it had been, it came back again, all at once. "By the way, what became of the child?" it asked. "It turned into a pig," Alice said. "I thought it would," said the cat, and disappeared again. Alice waited a while to see if it would come back, then walked on in the direction in which the March hare lived. "I've seen hatters," she said to herself, "so I'll go to see the March hare." As she said this, she looked up, and there sat the cat on a branch of a tree. "Did you say pig, or fig?" asked the cat. "I said pig, and I wish you wouldn't come and go so suddenly." "All right," said the cat, and this time it disappeared in such a way that its tail went first, and the last thing Alice saw was the grin which stayed some time after the rest of it had gone. "Well, I've seen a cat without a grin," thought Alice, "but a grin without a cat. It's the strangest thing I ever saw in all my life." She soon came in sight of the house of the March Hare. She thought it must be the right place, as the chimneys looked like ears, and the roof was covered with fur. It was so large a house that she did not like to go too near while she was so small. So she ate a small piece of mushroom from the left hand and raised herself to 2 feet high. Then she walked up to the house, though she was afraid it should be mad as the cat had said. Chapter 7. A Mad Tea Party. There was a table set out in the shade of the trees in front of the house, and the March Hare and the Hatter were at tea. A dormouse sat between them, but it seemed to have gone to sleep. The table was a long one, but the three were all crowded at one corner of it. "No room. No room," they cried out as soon as they saw Alice. "There's plenty of room," she said, and sat down in a large armchair at one end of the table. "Have some wine," the March Hare said in a kind voice. Alice looked all round the table, but there was nothing on it but tea. "I don't see the wine," she said. "There isn't any," said the March Hare. "Then it wasn't polite of you to ask me to have wine," said Alice. "It wasn't polite of you to sit down when no one had asked you to have a seat," said the March Hare. "I didn't know it was your table," said Alice. "It's laid for more than 3. "Your hair wants cutting," said the Hatter. He had looked hard at Alice for some time, and this was his first speech. "You should learn not to speak to a guest like that," said Alice. "It is very rude." The Hatter opened his eyes quite wide at this, but all he said was, "Why is a raven like a desk?" "Come, we shall have some fun now," thought Alice. "I'm glad they've begun asking riddles. I believe I can guess that," she added aloud. "Do you mean that you think you can find out the answer to it?" asked the March Hare. "I do," said Alice. "Then you should say what you mean," the March Hare went on. "I do," Alice said. At least I mean what I say. That's the same thing, you know." "Not the same thing a bit," said the Hatter. "Why, you might just as well say, 'I see what I eat' is the same thing as 'I eat what I see.' You might just as well say," added the March Hare, "that 'I like what I get' is the same thing as 'I get what I like.' You might just as well say," added the Dormouse, who seemed to be talking in his sleep, "that 'I breathe when I sleep' is the same thing as 'I sleep when I breathe.'" "It is the same with you," said the Hatter. No one spoke for some time, while Alice tried to think of all she knew of ravens and desks, which wasn't much. The Hatter was the first to speak. "What day of the month is it?" he said, turning to Alice. He had his watch in his hand, looked at it, and shook it now and then while he held it to his ear. Alice considered a little and said, "The 4th. 2 days wrong," sighed the Hatter. "I told you butter wouldn't suit this watch," he added, looking angrily at the March Hare. "It was the best butter," the March Hare said. "Yes, but some crumbs must have got in," the Hatter said. "You shouldn't have put it in with the bread knife." The March Hare took the watch and looked at it. Then he dipped it into his cup of tea and looked at it again, but all he could say was, "It was the best butter, you know." "Oh, what a funny watch," said Alice. "It tells the day of the month, and doesn't tell what o'clock it is." "Why should it?" said the Hatter. "Does your watch tell what year it is?" "Of course not," said Alice, "but there's no need that it should, since it stays the same year for such a long time together." "It is just the same with mine," said the Hatter. Alice felt puzzled. It seemed to Alice to have no meaning in it at all. "I don't quite understand you," she said, as politely as she could. "The Dormouse has gone to sleep once more," said the Hatter, and he poured some hot tea on the tip of its nose. The Dormouse shook its head and said, without opening its eyes, of course, just what I wanted to say myself." "Have you guessed the riddle yet?" the Hatter asked, turning to Alice. "No, I give it up," she said. "What's the answer?" "I do not know at all," said the Hatter. "Nor I," said the March Hare. Alice sighed. "I think you might do something better with the time," she said, "than waste it in asking riddles that have no answers." "If you knew time as well as I do," said the Hatter, You wouldn't talk about wasting it. It's him. I don't know what you mean, Alice said. Of course you don't, said the Hatter with a toss of his head. I dare say you never even spoke to Time. Maybe not, she replied. Now if you kept on good terms with him, said the Hatter, he would do anything you liked with the clock. For example, suppose it was 9 o'clock, just time to go to school. You'd only have to whisper a hint to Time, and round goes the clock. 1:30, time for lunch. I only wish it was, the March Hare said to itself in a whisper. That would be great, I'm sure, said Alice, but then, I shouldn't be hungry for it, you know. Not at first, perhaps, but you could keep it to 1:30 as long as you liked, said the Hatter. Is that the way you do? Asked Alice. The Hatter shook his head and sighed. Not I, he said. Time and I quarreled last March. It was at the great concert given by the Queen of Hearts and I had to sing, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Bat. How I wonder what you're at. You know the song, perhaps? I've heard something like it, said Alice. It goes on, you know, the Hatter said, in this way, up above the world you fly, like a tea tray in the sky, twinkle, twinkle. Here the Dormouse shook itself, and sang in its sleep, Twinkle, 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 and went on so long that they had to pinch it to make it stop. Well, I'd hardly finished the first verse, the Hatter went on, when the Queen jumped up and called out, he is murdering the time. Off with his head. And ever since that, he won't do a thing I ask. It's always 6 o'clock now. A bright idea came into Alice's head. Is that why so many tea things are put out here? She asked. Yes, that's it, said the Hatter with a sigh. It's always tea time, and we've no time to wash the things. Then you keep moving round, I suppose, said Alice. Exactly so, said the Hatter, as the things get used up. But what happens when you come to the beginning again? Alice dared to ask. Let's change the subject, the March Hare interrupted, yawning. I'm getting tired of this. Please tell us a story. I'm afraid I don't know one, said Alice. I want a clean cup, spoke up the Hatter. Let's all move one place on. He moved on as he spoke, and the Dormouse moved into his place. The March Hare moved into the Dormouse's place, and Alice rather unwillingly took the place of the March Hare. The Hatter was the only one to get any good from the change, and Alice was a good deal worse off, as the March Hare had upset the milk jug into his plate. Now, for your story, the March Hare said to Alice. I'm sure I don't know, Alice began. I don't think, then you shouldn't talk, said the Hatter. This was more than Alice could stand, so she got up and walked off. And though she looked back once or twice and half hoped they would call after her, they didn't seem to know that she was gone. The last time she saw them, they were trying to put the poor Dormouse into the teapot. Well, I'll never go there again, said Alice as she picked her way through the wood. It's the stupidest tea party I was ever at in all my life. As Alice said this, she saw that one of the trees had a door that led right into it. That's strange, she thought, but I haven't seen a thing today that isn't strange. I think I may as well go in at once. And in she went. Once more she found herself in the long hall, and close to the little glass stand. She took up the little key and unlocked the door that led to the garden. Then she began to eat some of the mushroom which she had kept in her pocket. When she was about a foot high, she went through the door and walked down the little hall. Then, she found herself, at last, in the lovely garden, where she had seen the bright flowers and the cool fountains. Chapter 8. The Queen's Croquet Ground. A large rose tree stood near the garden gate. The flowers on it were white, but 3 men who seemed to be in a great hurry were painting them red. Alice thought this a strange thing to do, so she went nearer to watch them. Just as she came up to them, she heard one of them say, Look out now, 5. Don't splash paint on me like that. I couldn't help it, said 5. 6 knocked my arm. Hearing this, 6 looked up and said, That's right, 5. Always lay the blame on others. You need talk, said 5. I heard the Queen say your head must come off. What for? Asked the one who spoke first. That's none of your business, 2, said 6. Yes, it is his business. said 5, "and I'll tell him." He brought the cooked tulip roots for onions. 6 threw down a brush and said, "Well, of all the wrong things." Just then his eyes chanced to fall on Alice, who stood and watched them, and he stopped suddenly. The others looked round also, and all of them bowed low. "Would you tell me please," said Alice, "why you paint those roses?" 5 and 6 did not speak, but looked at 2, who said in a low voice, "Why, the fact is, you see, miss, this here ought to have been a red rose tree, and we put a white one in by mistake. And if the Queen was to find it out, we should all have our heads cut off, you know. So you see, miss, we are hard at work to get it painted, so that she may not." Just then 5, who had been anxiously looking across the garden, called out, "The Queen! The Queen!" and the 3 men at once threw themselves flat upon their faces. Alice heard a sound of many footsteps and looked round, eager to see the Queen. First came 10 soldiers carrying clubs. These were all shaped like the 3 men at the rose tree, long and flat like cards, with their hands and feet at the corners. Next came 10 men who were ornamented with diamonds and walked 2 and 2, like the soldiers. The 10 children of the King and Queen came next, and the little dears came jumping merrily along hand in hand, in couples. They were ornamented with hearts. Next came the guests, mostly kings and queens, and among them Alice recognized the white rabbit. It was talking nervously, smiling at everything that was said, and went by without noticing her. Then came the knave of hearts carrying the king's crown on a red cushion, and last of all came the king and queen of hearts. At first, Alice wondered whether she ought to lie down on her face like the 3 men at the rose tree. But what would be the use of such a fine show, she thought, if all had to lie down so that they couldn't see it? So she stood where she was and waited. When they came to where she stood, they all stopped and looked at her, and the Queen said in a severe voice, "Who is this?" She spoke to the knave of hearts, who bowed and smiled, but did not speak. "Fool," said the Queen with a toss of her head. Then she turned to Alice and asked, "What's your name, child?" "My name is Alice, Your Majesty," said Alice, but she thought to herself, "Why, they're only a pack of cards, after all. I need be afraid of them." "And who are these?" asked the Queen, as she pointed to the 3 men who still lay around the rose tree. For you see, as they all lay on their faces, and their backs were the same as the rest of the pack, she could not tell who they were. "How should I know?" said Alice, and thought it strange that she should speak to a queen in that way. The Queen turned red with anger, glared at her for a moment like a wild beast, then screamed, "Off with her head!" "Off? Nonsense," said Alice, in a loud, firm voice, and the Queen said no more. The King laid his hand on the Queen's arm and said, "Consider, my dear, she is only a child." The Queen turned angrily away from him and said to the knave, "Turn them over." The knave did so, with 1 foot. "Get up," said the Queen in a loud voice, and the 3 men jumped up at once and bowed to the King and Queen and to the whole crowd. "Stop that," screamed the Queen. Then she turned to the rose tree and asked, "What have you been doing here?" "May it please your Majesty," said 2, going down on one knee as he spoke, "we were trying." "I see," said the Queen, who had seen that some of the roses were painted red and some were still white. "Off with their heads," and the crowd moved on, while 3 of the soldiers stayed to cut off the heads of the poor men, who ran to Alice for help. "They shan't hurt you," she said, as she hid them in a large flower pot that stood near. The 3 soldiers walked round and looked for them a short while, then marched off. "Are their heads off?" shouted the Queen. "Their heads are gone, Your Majesty," the soldiers shouted back. "That's right," shouted the Queen. "Can you play croquet?" she asked Alice. "Yes," shouted Alice. "Come on then," shouted the Queen, and Alice went on with them. It's a fine day," said a weak voice at her side. She was walking by the white rabbit, who was looking anxiously into her face. "Yes," said Alice, "where's the Duchess?" "Be quiet," said the rabbit, in a low voice. He looked back as he spoke, then put his mouth close to her ear and whispered, "She's to have her head cut off." "What for?" asked Alice. "Did you say, 'What a pity'?" the rabbit asked. "No, I didn't," said Alice. "I don't think it's at all a pity." I said what for? She boxed the queen's ears, the rabbit began. Alice gave a little scream of joy. Oh, be quiet, the rabbit whispered in a frightened voice. The queen will hear you. You see, she came late, and the queen said, go to your places, shouted the queen in a loud voice, and people began running about in all directions. Soon each one had found his place, and the game began. Alice thought she had never seen such a strange croquet ground in all her life. It was all ridges. The balls were live hedgehogs. The mallets were live birds, and the soldiers bent down and stood on their hands and feet to make the arches. At first Alice found it hard to use a live bird for a mallet. It was a large bird with a long neck and long legs. She put it under her arm with its legs hanging down. But just as she got its neck straight, and thought now she could give the ball a good blow with its head, the bird would twist its neck round, and give her such a strange look, that she could not help laughing. And by the time she had got its head down again, she found that the hedgehog had crawled off. Besides all this, there was always a ridge or a hole in the way, wherever she wanted to send the hedgehog to, and she couldn't find an arch in its place, for the men were always getting up and walking off to other parts of the ground. Alice soon made up her mind that it was a very difficult game to play. The players all played at once without waiting for turns, quarreling all the while, and fighting for the hedgehogs. The queen was soon very angry, and she went stamping about and shouting off with his head, or off with her head, about once in a minute. Alice began to feel very uneasy. To be sure, she had not yet had any dispute with the queen, but she knew that it might happen any minute. And then, she thought, what shall I do? She was looking round for some way to get off without being seen, when she saw a strange thing in the air. It puzzled her very much at first, but, after watching it a minute or two, she saw it was a grin, and she said to herself, it's the cat. Now I shall have somebody to talk to. How are you getting on? Said the cat, as soon as there was mouth enough for it to speak with. Alice waited till she saw the eyes, then nodded. It's no use to speak to it till its ears have come, or at least one of them. In a short time the whole head appeared. Alice put down her bird and told him of the game, feeling very glad that she had someone to listen to her. I don't think they are at all fair in the game, Alice complained, and they all talk so loud that one can't hear oneself speak. And they don't have rules to play by. At least if they have, they don't mind them. And you don't know how bad it is to have to use live things to play with. The arch I have to go through next walked off just now to the far end of the ground, and I should have struck the queen's hedgehog, but it ran off when it saw that mine was near. How do you like the queen? Asked the cat in a low voice. Not at all, said Alice, she's extremely. Just then, she saw that the queen was close behind her, listening, so she went on, sure to win that it's hardly worthwhile to go on with the game. The queen smiled and passed on. Who are you talking to? Said the king, as he came up to Alice, and stared at the cat's head very curiously. It's a friend of mine, a Cheshire cat, said Alice. I don't like the look of it at all, said the king. However, it may kiss my hand if it likes. I don't want to, said the cat. Don't be rude. And don't look at me like that, said the king. He got behind Alice as he spoke. A cat may look at a king, said Alice. I've read that in some book, but I don't remember where. Well, it must get off from here, said the king in a firm voice, and he called to the queen, who was passing at the moment, my dear, I wish you would see that this cat leaves here at once. The queen had only one way of settling all difficulties, great or small. Off with his head, she said, without even looking round. I'll fetch the soldier myself, said the king eagerly, and rushed off. Alice thought she might as well go back and see how the game went on. She heard the queen's voice in the distance as she screamed with anger, off with his head. He has missed his turn. Alice did not like the look of things at all, for the game was so mixed she could not tell when her turn came, so she went in search of her hedgehog. The hedgehog was fighting with another one, and Alice thought it was a good time to strike one of them. But her bird had gone to the other side of the ground, and she saw it was trying to fly up into a tree. By the time she had caught the bird and brought it back, the fight was over, and both hedgehogs were out of sight. But it doesn't matter much, thought Alice, for there is not an arch on this side the ground. So she put it away under her arm, so that it might not escape again, and went back to have some more talk with her friend. When she reached the place, she was surprised to find quite a crowd round the cat. The king, the queen, and the soldier who had come to cut off the cat's head were all talking at once, while all the rest stood silent and looked quite serious. As soon as they saw Alice, they wanted her to say which one was right. But as all three spoke at once, she found it hard to make out what they said. The soldier said that you couldn't cut off a head unless there was a body to cut it off from, that he had never had to do such a thing, and he wouldn't begin it at his time of life. The king said that all heads could be cut off, and that you weren't to talk nonsense. The queen said that, if something wasn't done about it at once, she would have everybody's head cut off. It was this last threat that had made the whole crowd look so serious. Alice could think of nothing else to say. She only said, "It belongs to the Duchess. You'd better ask her about it." "She's in prison," the queen said to the soldier. "Fetch her here." And the soldier went off like an arrow. The cat's head started to fade out of sight as soon as the soldier was gone, and by the time he had come back with the Duchess, it could not be seen at all. So the king and the man ran up and down looking for it, while the rest went back to the game. Chapter 9. The Mock Turtle Story. "You can't think how glad I am to see you once more, you dear old thing," said the Duchess as she took Alice's arm, and they walked off together. Alice was glad to see her so pleasant, and thought to herself that the Duchess might not be so bad as she had seemed to be when they first met. Then Alice began to think what she would do if she were a duchess. She had quite forgotten the Duchess by this time, and was a little surprised when she heard her voice close to her ear. "You're thinking about something, my dear, and that makes you forget to talk. I can't tell you just now what the moral of that is, but I shall think of it." "Are you sure it has one?" asked Alice. "Oh, child," said the Duchess. "Everything's got a moral, if only you can find it." And she came closer to Alice's side as she spoke. "The game's going on rather better now," Alice said, thinking she ought to fill in the time with talk of some kind. "It is so," said the Duchess, "and the moral of that is, oh, it is love, that makes the world go round." "Somebody said," Alice whispered, "that it's done by everybody minding their own business." "Ah, well, it means much the same thing," said the Duchess. "How she likes to find morals in things," Alice thought to herself. "Why do you think so long?" asked the Duchess. "I've a right to think," said Alice in a sharp voice, for she was beginning to feel a little worried. "Just as much right," said the Duchess, "as pigs have to fly, and the more." But here the voice of the Duchess died out in the middle of her favorite word, moral. Alice looked up and there stood the Queen in front of them with her arms folded and a dark frown upon her face. "A fine day, Your Majesty," the Duchess began in a weak voice. "Now, I warn you in time," shouted the Queen, with a stamp on the ground as she spoke. "Either you or your head must be off. Take your choice." The Duchess took her choice and was gone in a moment. "Let's go on with the game," the Queen said to Alice. And Alice was too frightened to speak, but went with her back to the croquet ground. The guests had all sat down in the shade to rest while the Queen was away, but as soon as they saw her, they rushed back to the game, while the Queen said if they were not in their places at once, it would cost them their lives. All the time the game went on, the Queen kept shouting, "Off with his head," or "Off with her head," so that by the end of half an hour there was no one left on the grounds but the King, the Queen, and Alice. Then the Queen stopped, quite out of breath, and said to Alice, "Have you seen the mock turtle yet?" "No," said Alice, "I don't know what a mock turtle is." "It is a thing mock turtle soup is made from," the Queen said. "I've never seen or heard of one," Alice said. "Come on then, and he shall tell you his story," said the Queen. As they walked off, Alice heard the King say in a low voice to the group of people, "You may all go free." That's a good thing, thought Alice, for she felt very sad that all those men must have their heads cut off. They soon came to where a griffin lay fast asleep in the sun. If you don't know what it is like, Look at the picture. Up, lazy thing, said the queen, and take this young lady to see the mock turtle. I must go back now. And she walked away and left Alice with the griffin. Alice did not quite like the look of the creature, but she thought she would be quite as safe with it as she would be with the queen, so she waited. The griffin sat up and rubbed its eyes, then it watched the queen till she was out of sight. Then it laughed. What fun, it said, half to itself, half to Alice. What is the fun, she asked. Why, it said. It's all her fancy. They never cut off those heads, you know. Come on. Soon they saw the mock turtle in the distance, sitting sad and lonely on a rock. As they came near, Alice could hear him sigh, as if his heart would break. What makes him so sad? Alice asked. It's all his fancy, said the griffin. He isn't sad at all, you know. Come on. So they went up to the mock turtle, who looked at them with large eyes full of tears, but did not speak. This young lady here, said the griffin, she wants to know your history. I'll tell it to her, said the mock turtle in a deep, sad voice. Sit down, both of you, and don't speak a word till I've finished. So they sat down, and no one spoke for some time. Once, said the mock turtle at last, with a deep sigh, I was a real turtle. When we were young we went to school in the sea. We were taught by an old turtle, we used to call him Tortoise. Why did you call him Tortoise, if he wasn't one? Alice asked. He taught us, that's why, said the mock turtle. You are a fool not to know that. You ought to be ashamed of yourself for asking such a simple question, added the griffin. Then they both sat and looked at poor Alice, who felt as if she could sink into the earth. At last the griffin said to the mock turtle, Go on, old fellow, and he went on in these words, Yes, we went to school in the sea, though you may not believe it. I didn't say I did not, said Alice. You did, said the mock turtle. Hold your tongue, added the griffin. The mock turtle went on, We had the best of educations. In fact, we went to school every day. I've been to a day school too, said Alice. You need be so proud as all that. Were you taught washing? Asked the mock turtle. Of course not, said Alice. Ah, then yours wasn't a good school, said the mock turtle. Now at ours they taught French, music, and washing. You couldn't have needed it much in the sea, said Alice. I didn't learn it, said the mock turtle, with a sigh. I just took the first course. How many hours a day did you do lessons? Asked Alice. 10 hours the first day, said the mock turtle, 9 the next, and so on. What a strange plan, said Alice. This was such a new thing to Alice that she sat still a good while and didn't speak. Then the 11th day must have been a holiday, she said. Of course it was, said the mock turtle. That's enough about lessons, said the griffin. Tell her now of the games we played. Chapter 10. The Lobster Dance. The mock turtle sighed, looked at Alice and tried to speak, but for a minute or two, no words came out of his mouth. It looks as if he had a bone in his throat, said the griffin, and it began to shake him and beat him in the back. At last the mock turtle found his voice, and, with tears running down his cheeks, he went on, You may not have lived much in the sea. I haven't, said Alice, so you may not know what a fine thing a lobster dance is. No, said Alice. What sort of a dance is it? Why, said the griffin, you first form in a line on the seashore. 2 lines, cried the mock turtle. Seals, turtles, and so on. Then when you've cleared all the small fish out of the way, that takes some time, put in the griffin. You advance twice, each with a lobster as a partner, cried the griffin. Of course, the mock turtle said, advance twice. Change lobsters and come back in same way, said the griffin. Then, you know, the mock turtle went on, you throw the lobsters, shouted the griffin, with a jump into the air. As far out to sea as you can, swim out for them, screamed the griffin. Turn a somersault in the sea, cried the mock turtle. Change again, called the griffin at the top of his voice. Then back to land, and, that's all the first part, said the mock turtle. Both the griffin and the mock turtle had jumped about like mad things all this time. Now they sat down quite sad and still, and looked at Alice. It must be a pretty dance, said Alice. "Would you like to see some of it?" asked the Mock Turtle. "Oh, yes," she said. "Come, let's try the first part," said the Mock Turtle to the Griffin. "We can do it without lobsters, you know." "Which shall sing?" "Oh, you sing," said the Griffin. "I don't know the words." So they danced round and round Alice, now and then stepping on her toes when they passed too close. They waved their front paws to mark the time, while the Mock Turtle sang a strange kind of song, ending with these words: "Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance?" "Thank you, it's a fine dance to watch," said Alice, glad that it was over at last. "Now," said the Griffin, "tell us about what you have seen and done in your life." "I could tell you of the strange things I have seen today," said Alice, wondering whether they wished to hear it. "All right, go on," they both cried. So Alice told them what she had seen that day, from the time when she first saw the White Rabbit. They came up quite close to her, one on each side, and sat still till she got to the part where she tried to say, "You are old, Father William," and the words all came wrong. Then the Mock Turtle drew a long breath and said, "That's quite strange." "It's all as strange as it can be," said the Griffin. "It all came different," the Mock Turtle said, while he seemed to be in deep thought. "I should like to hear her try to say something now. Tell her to begin." He looked at the Griffin, as if he thought it had the right to make Alice do as it pleased. "Stand up and say, 'It is the voice of the sluggard,'" said the Griffin. "How the creatures order one about and make one repeat lessons," thought Alice. "I might just as well be at school at once." However, she got up and began to repeat it, but her head was so full of the lobster dance that she didn't know what she was saying, and the words all came very strange indeed. "What is the use of saying all that?" the Mock Turtle broke in, "if you don't tell what it means as you go on? I tell you it is all nonsense." "Yes, I think you might as well stop," said the Griffin, and Alice was but too glad to do so. "Shall we try the lobster dance once more?" the Griffin went on, "or would you like the Mock Turtle to sing you a song?" "Oh, a song please, if the Mock Turtle would be so kind," Alice said eagerly. The Griffin threw back his head and said, "Sing her turtle soup, will you, old fellow?" The Mock Turtle sighed deeply and began his song, but just then the cry of "The trial is beginning" was heard a long way off. "Come on," cried the Griffin. He took her by the hand, ran off, and did not wait to hear the song. "What trial is it?" Alice asked as she ran, but the Griffin only said, "Come on," and still ran as fast as he could. Chapter 11. Who Stole the Pies? The King and Queen of Hearts were seated on their throne when Alice and the Griffin came up, with a great crowd about them. There were all sorts of small birds and beasts, as well as the whole pack of cards. The knave stood in front of them in chains, with a soldier on each side to guard him, and near the king was the White Rabbit, with a trumpet in one hand and a roll of paper in the other. In the middle of the court was a table with a large dish of pies on it. They looked so good that it made Alice feel as if she would like to eat some of them. "I wish they'd get the trial done," she thought, "and hand round the pies." But there seemed no chance of this, so she began looking at everything about her to pass away the time. This was the first time Alice had been in a court of this kind, and she was quite pleased to find that she knew the name of nearly everything she saw there. "That's the judge," she thought. "I know him by his great wig." The judge, by the way, was the king, and as he wore his crown on top of his wig, he did not look at all comfortable. "And that's the jury box," thought Alice, "and those 12 creatures," she had to say creatures, you see, for some of them were beasts and some were birds, "I guess are the jurymen." She said this last word 2 or 3 times, as she was proud that she knew it, for she was right when she thought that few girls of her age would have known what it all meant. The 12 jurymen were all writing very busily on slates. "What are they writing now?" Alice asked the Griffin, in a low voice. "The trial has not begun yet." "They're putting down their names," the Griffin said, "for fear they should forget them." "Stupid things," Alice said in a loud voice, but stopped at once, for the White Rabbit cried out, "Silence in court," and the king put on his glasses and looked anxiously round to see who was talking. Alice could see quite well that the jurymen all wrote down stupid things on their slates. She could even make out that one of them didn't know how to spell stupid, and he asked the one by his side to tell him. One of the jurymen had a pencil that made a terrible noise as he wrote. Of course, Alice could not stand this, so she went round near him and soon found a chance to get it from him. This she did in such a way that the poor juryman, it was Bill, the lizard, could not make out at all where it was, so he wrote with one finger for the rest of the day. Of course, this was of no use, as it left no mark on the slate. "Read the charge," said the king. Hearing this, the white rabbit blew his trumpet 3 times, and then from the paper in his hand read, "The Queen of Hearts, she made some pies, all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those pies, and took them quite away." "The jury will now consider the case," said the king. Not yet," the rabbit said in a hurry. "There is a great deal else to come first." "Call the first witness," said the king, and the white rabbit blew the trumpet and called out, "First witness." The first to come was the hatter. He came in with a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other. "I beg pardon, Your Majesty," he said, "but I had to bring these in, as I hadn't quite finished my tea when I was sent for." "You ought to have finished," said the king. "When did you begin?" The hatter looked at the March Hare, who had just come into court, arm in arm with the Dormouse. 14th of March, I think it was," he said. 15th, said the March Hare. 16th, added the Dormouse. "Write that down," said the king to the jury. They wrote down all 3 dates on their slates, and then added them up, and changed the sum to shillings and pence. "Take off your hat," the king said to the hatter. "It isn't mine," said the hatter. "Stole it," cried the king, as he turned to the jury, who at once wrote it down. "I keep them to sell," the hatter added. "I've none of my own. I'm a hatter." Here the queen put on her glasses and stared hard at the hatter, who turned pale with fright. "Tell what you know of this case," said the king, "and don't be nervous, or I'll have your head off on the spot." This did not seem to calm him at all. He shifted from one foot to the other and looked at the queen, and in his fright, he bit a large piece out of his teacup instead of the bread and butter. Just then Alice felt strange. She did not know why till she saw she had begun to grow again. "I wish you wouldn't squeeze so," said the Dormouse, who was sitting next to her. "I can hardly breathe." "I can't help it," said Alice. "I'm growing." "You've no right to grow here," said the Dormouse. "Don't talk such nonsense," said Alice. "You know you're growing too." "Yes, but not so fast as to squeeze the breath out of those who sit by me." He got up and crossed to the other side of the court. All this time the queen had not stopped staring at the hatter, and just as the Dormouse crossed the court, she said to one of the men, "Bring me the list of those who sang in the last concert." Hearing this, the poor hatter trembled so hard that he shook both his shoes off. "Tell what you know of this case," the king called out again, "or I'll have your head off, if you do shake." "I'm a poor man," the hatter went on, and most things twinkled after that, but the March Hare said, "I didn't," said the March Hare in a great hurry. "You did," said the hatter. "I didn't," said the March Hare. "Well, I'm sure the Dormouse said," the hatter went on, with a look at the Dormouse, but he was fast asleep. "But what did the Dormouse say?" asked one of the jury. "That I can't tell," said the hatter. "You must tell, or I'll have your head off," said the king. The poor hatter dropped his cup and bread and went down on one knee. "I'm a poor man," he began. "You're a poor speaker," said the king. Here one of the guinea pigs cheered, and one of the men seized him, put him into a bag, tied it up with strings, and then sat upon it. "If that's all you know, you may sit down," the king said. "I'd like to finish my tea first," said the hatter, with a look at the queen who was still reading the list in her hand. "You may go," said the king, and the hatter left the court in such a hurry that he did not even wait to put his shoes on. "And just take his head off outside," the queen added to one of the soldiers. But the hatter was out of sight before the man could get to the door. "Call the next witness," said the king. The next to come was the duchess's cook. She carried the pepper box in her hand, and Alice guessed who it was, even before she got into the court, for the people near the door began sneezing all at once. "Tell what you know of this case," said the king. "I shan't," said the cook. The king looked at the White Rabbit, who said in a low voice, "Your Majesty must make her tell." "Well, if I must, I must," said the king with a sad look. He folded his arms and frowned at the cook till his eyes were almost out of sight, then asked in a deep voice, "What are pies made of?" "Pepper, mostly," said the cook. "Sugar," said a weak voice near her. "Catch that dormouse," the queen cried out. "Off with his head. Turn him out of court. Off with his head." The whole court ran here and there to turn the dormouse out, and by the time this was done, the cook had gone. "That's all right," said the king, as if he were glad that she was gone. "Call the next," and he added in a low voice to the queen, "Now, my dear, you must take the next witness in hand. It quite makes my head ache." Alice watched the White Rabbit as he looked over the list. She thought to herself, "I want to see what the next witness will be like, for they haven't found out much yet." Think, if you can, how she felt when the White Rabbit read out, at the top of his little voice, the name Alice. Chapter 12. Alice's Evidence. "Here," cried Alice. But she quite forgot how large she had grown in the last few minutes. She jumped up in such a hurry that the edge of her skirt tipped the jury box and turned all the jurymen out on the heads of the crowd below. "Oh, I beg your pardon," she said, and picked them up and put them back in the jury box as fast as she could. "The trial cannot go on," said the king in a serious voice, "till all the men are back in place, all," he said with great force and looked hard at Alice. As soon as their slates and pencils had been handed back to them, the jury began to write out a history of the accident. "What do you know of this case?" the king asked Alice. "Nothing," said Alice. "Nothing at all?" asked the king. "Nothing at all," said Alice. "Write that down," the king said to the jury. The king sat for some time and wrote in his notebook. Then he called out, "Silence," and read from his book, Rule 42. "All people more than a mile high to leave the court." All looked at Alice. "I'm not a mile high," said Alice. "You are," said the king. "Nearly 2 miles high," added the queen. "Well, I shan't go," said Alice, "for I know that's a new rule you have just made." "It's the first rule in the book," said the king. "Then it ought to be Rule 1, said Alice. The king turned pale and shut his notebook at once. "The jury can now consider the case," he said in a weak voice. "There's more evidence to come yet, please your majesty," said the White Rabbit, as he jumped up. "This paper has just been picked up." "What's in it?" asked the queen. "I haven't read it yet," said the White Rabbit, "but it seems to be a note from the Knave of Hearts to somebody." "Whose name is on it?" said one of the jurymen. "There's no name on it," said the White Rabbit. He looked at it with more care as he spoke, and added, "It isn't a note at all. It's a poem." "Please your majesty," said the knave, "I didn't write it, and they can't prove that I did. There's no name signed at the end." "If you didn't sign it," said the king, "that makes the matter worse. You must have meant some harm, or you'd have signed your name like an honest man." All clapped their hands at this, as it was the first really clever thing the king had said that day. "That proves he is guilty," said the queen. "It does not prove anything," said Alice. "Why, you don't even know what it is about." "Read it," said the king. "Where shall I begin, your majesty?" the White Rabbit asked. "Begin at the beginning," said the king, "and go on till you come to the end. Then stop." When the White Rabbit finished reading the poem, the king rubbed his hands and said, "That's the most important piece of evidence we've heard yet. So now let the jury, if any one of them can explain it," said Alice. She had grown so large by this time that she had no fear of the king. "I should be glad to hear it. I don't think there's any sense in it." The jury all wrote down on their slates, "She doesn't think there's any sense in it." But no one tried to explain it. "If there's no sense in it," said the king, "that saves much trouble, you know, as we need try to find it. Let the jury consider their judgment." "No, no," said the queen. "Sentence first, then the judgment." Such nonsense, said Alice out loud. Of course the jury must make. Hold your tongue, screamed the Queen. I won't, said Alice. Off with her head, shouted the Queen at the top of her voice. No one moved. Who cares for you, said Alice. She had grown to her full size by this time. You are nothing but a pack of cards. At this, the whole pack rose up in the air and flew down upon her. She gave a little scream and tried to beat them off, and found herself lying on the bank with her head in the lap of her sister, who was brushing away some dead leaves that had fallen down from the trees onto her face. Wake up, Alice dear, said her sister. Why, what a long sleep you have had. Oh, I've had such a strange dream, said Alice. Then she told her sister as well as she could all these strange things that you have just read about. When she came to the end of it, her sister kissed her and said, It was a strange dream, dear, I'm sure, but run now in to your tea. It's getting late. So Alice got up and ran off, thinking while she ran, as well as she might, what a wonderful dream it had been.